Who are you following? Everybody is following somebody or something. Put another way, everyone is a disciple. The question isn't, are you a disciple? It's who or what are you a disciple of? 2,000 years ago, a Hebrew rabbi by the name of Jesus made this invitation: come and follow me. He invited anyone and everyone to become his disciples or students in living. Over the last 2,000 years, millions of people have said yes to Jesus' invitation. It's changed not only their lives, but the course of human history, and it can do the same for you. Following Jesus. You likely recognize this language if you spent any time in the church. But what exactly does it mean? Does it mean we believe in a set of ideas called Christianity, or go to church on Sunday, or try really hard to be a good person? And this raises another question. How do we follow Jesus in the modern world, where we're all so busy and in a hurry and distracted by our devices? Where burnout is a rite of passage and anxiety is like an electric pulse in our bodies all day long. Living in cities that are noisy and full of people with totally different worldviews. What does it look like to follow Jesus today? This 8-session course is a primer on spiritual formation. The goal is to lay a foundation for you to begin a lifelong journey of apprenticeship to Jesus. You may be here and you're a brand new Christian just getting started on your spiritual journey. Or you may be here and you've been a Christian for your entire life, but you're ready to take your discipleship to Jesus more seriously. Or you may be a serious follower of Jesus, but you want to learn more about the practices of Jesus or how to craft a rule of life. Wherever you come from, we are so happy you're here.
Hello everyone, I'm Yinka. I'm your host for this course alongside John Mark, and on behalf of all of us at Practicing the Way, welcome. We designed this course as an introduction to spiritual formation that will set you up for a lifetime of learning the practices and relational rhythms of the way of Jesus. And it's designed to be done in community with the people to your right and left. In each session, we'll learn about apprenticeship to Jesus. And then we'll send you away with spiritual exercises to take what you've learned and, in the words of Jesus, put them into practice. After that, we'll invite you to reflect on your experience and pay attention to what God is doing inside you with prompt questions in your companion guide. Then we'll come back together and process it all in community, where you get a chance to share honestly about your spiritual journey. This cycle of teaching, practice, reflection, and dialogue in community is the pathway to transformation. For session 1, let's explore together what it means to follow Jesus.
Let's circle back to the story of Jesus calling his first disciples. The story is from Mark chapter 1, and in it, Jesus is walking along the Sea of Galilee when he comes upon Simon and Andrew, 2 brothers running a fishing business off the beach. Jesus says to them, "Come, follow me." And then we read this: "At once they left their nets and followed him." If you've read this story before, it's easy to lose sight of just how bizarre it is. What would make Simon and Andrew drop everything? I mean, literally walk out of their business with no advanced planning, all to follow a rabbi with no income stream, no organization, no home even. Can you imagine? You're just sitting at the office and Jesus comes by and says, "Come, follow me," and you just walk out of your job right then and there. What would move Simon and Andrew to give up everything? Let me offer you a little backstory. In first century Israel, you would regularly see rabbis walking along the road or teaching at your village synagogue. The word rabbi means master or teacher. Rabbis were the revered teachers, not just of the Torah or the Bible of their day, but of life with God. Most of them were itinerant. They would travel from place to place to teach, and behind them would be a small group of students called talmidim. The Hebrew word talmid literally means learner, but it can also be translated student or follower. The most common translation is disciple, but a growing number of scholars argue the best word we have in the English language to capture the full meaning of the Hebrew word talmid is apprentice. The philosophy of education in the ancient world was nothing like ours in the modern West, where you go to class, sit through a lecture, and take notes for a test. It wasn't informational, it was formational. The goal wasn't just to learn about something, but to become someone. And discipleship, or apprenticeship, was the pinnacle of the first century Jewish educational system. Jewish kids started school around 5 years old at the Beit Sefer, or the House of the Book, which was the equivalent of elementary school. The primary textbook was the Bible, but it was an oral culture, and by the age of 12 or 13, most students would have memorized the entire Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. At that point, the vast majority of students went home to apprentice in the family business or work the family farm. But the best of the best would go on to a second level of education called Beit Midrash, or the House of Learning, where they would continue their studies. It was built off the side of the synagogue and run by a full-time scribe or teacher. By the age of 17, they would have memorized the entire Old Testament. At this point, the vast majority were done. But the best of the best of the best would go on to apprentice under a rabbi. Let's say you were one of the lucky few who became an apprentice to a rabbi. From that point on, your entire life was organized around 3 driving goals. First, to be with your rabbi. You would leave your family and your village and follow your rabbi 24/7. Apprenticeship was deeply relational. You would walk behind your rabbi on the road, eat every meal with them, keep Sabbath together, be with them all day long. Secondly, to become like your rabbi. The heart and soul of apprenticeship was to be with your rabbi for the purpose of becoming like your rabbi. You would imitate their whole life, copy their mannerisms, adopt their figures of speech. You wanted to be like them. Finally, to do as your rabbi did. The goal of apprenticeship to a rabbi was to one day become a rabbi yourself. And if you made it through the long process of apprenticeship, then when your rabbi felt you were ready, he would turn to you and say something like, "Okay, I think it's time. Go and make disciples." This was what it meant to be a disciple. And this is still what it means to be a disciple. If you flip the Jewish model of apprenticeship around from the 1st century to the 21st, a clear picture of apprenticeship to Jesus comes into focus. To follow Jesus is to organize your life around the 3 driving goals of an apprentice. 1, to be with Jesus. 2, to become like Jesus. And 3, to do as he did. A short word on each. First, to be with Jesus. Jesus himself called his disciples to be with him. This is the first goal of an apprentice of Jesus, to spend every possible moment in awareness of and connection to him, in what the Dutch monk Thomas à Kempis called a familiar friendship with Jesus. Jesus himself said to his apprentices, "I have called you friends." And through friendship with Jesus, we enter into the inner life of God himself, the Trinitarian community of love. Through Jesus, we are enveloped in the love and joy and peace that is flowing between the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And we live in connection to this love all day long. Jesus called this abiding. The French contemplative Madame Guyon called it continuous inner abiding. The pastor A.W. Tozer called it constant, conscious communion. But one of my favorites is from Brother Lawrence, who called it the practice of the presence of God. We can live this way in connection to Jesus, but it takes practice in turning our mind and heart to God all through the day. Dallas Willard, a teacher of spiritual formation, said this: "The first and most basic thing we can and must do is to keep God before our minds. This is the fundamental secret of caring for our souls. Our part in this practicing the presence of God is to direct and redirect our minds constantly to Him. In the early time of our practicing, we may well be challenged by our burdensome habits of dwelling on things less than God. But these are habits, not the law of gravity, and can be broken. A new grace-filled habit will replace the former ones as we take intentional steps toward keeping God before us. Soon our minds will return to God as the needle of a compass constantly returns to the north. If God is the great longing of our souls, He will become the pole star of our inward beings." So, the first goal of an apprentice, to be with Jesus. Our next goal is to become like Jesus. This is the bleeding heart of an apprentice, to be transformed from the inside out, to think like Jesus, feel like Jesus, talk like Jesus, live and love like Jesus. Jesus had this great line about how the apprentice is not above the rabbi, but everyone who is fully trained will be like their rabbi. Notice his language: everyone who is fully trained. This is a process. None of us become like Jesus in a flash from heaven, but through a long process of training and apprenticeship to Him. The term we use for this process is spiritual formation, which is the process by which our spirit, or our inner woman or man, is formed to be like Jesus Himself. Imagine what Jesus would look like expressed through your personality, gender, ethnicity, stage of life, and culture. Imagine if you were to become more loving, joyful, peaceful, patient, and kind, if you were to become more like Jesus. This is the second driving goal of an apprentice of Jesus. Finally, it's to do as He did. Remember Jesus' invitation: "Come, follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people." In English, this sounds like a cheesy pun, but it's not. Fishers of people was a first-century idiom for a great rabbi, because the most brilliant rabbis had the ability to capture your heart and mind with their teaching. Jesus is saying, "Come follow me, and I'll train you to do what I do." Think about it. If you're an apprentice to a plumber, then at the end of your apprenticeship program, your goal isn't just to know all about plumbing, it's to be able to plumb a house. In the same way, the goal of an apprentice of Jesus isn't just to know all about Jesus, but to be able to do the kinds of things He did, to join Jesus in His work of preaching, teaching, serving, healing, prophesying, and deliverance. This may sound impossible to you, but as you are with Jesus and become like Him, you will naturally find yourself saying and doing the kinds of things He said and did. Be with Jesus, become like Jesus, do as He did. This is what we mean by practicing the way of Jesus. The first followers of Jesus called themselves the Way, or followers of the Way. The way of Jesus is not just a set of beliefs, a theology or philosophy of life, and it's not just a moral system, a list of do's and do-nots. It is that, but it's so much more. It's a way of life based on that of Jesus Himself. To apprentice under Jesus is to practice His way, and over a lifelong spiritual journey to be transformed.
I didn't grow up in the church on a weekly basis, although from time to time my parents would send me to church with my grandparents who lived in Brooklyn. And one day, as a 19-year-old experiencing lots of anxiety, lots of relational challenges, I came to church and someone preached a message about having life in God. And the message was so compelling that I said, yes, that's the kind of life that I am longing for, the life I'm looking for, a life of communion with God. And so I said yes to Jesus, to follow him in a small church in Brooklyn. After that, I found myself with lots of questions about what it means to follow Jesus now. I walked down the street to see my grandfather Marcus, who was a man who knew God in profound ways. And he had a way of just sitting at the edge of his bed, reading his Bible with an M&Ms in his hand. And I walked into his bedroom one day and said, "Grandpa, I've made a decision to follow Jesus." He was at the service there, so he saw it, but he looked at me and said, "What you have had is an encounter with God, but now you need a life of formation to sustain that." And he asked me to sit down next to him. I sat down with him, and I had just lots of questions about the Bible. And for hours that day, which would lead into doing that for 4 to 5 times a week, 2 to 3 hours each time for 8 months before he died, we would pore over the scriptures. I would ask him questions about prayer, about studying the Bible, about journaling my prayers to God. And in those first 8 months, I met God in some significant ways in that one little relationship that I had in a small bedroom in Brooklyn. And that set me on a new trajectory, a fresh trajectory of what it means to follow Jesus, incorporating my entire life under his rule, under his reign. And at the time of this conversation here, it's been 25 years and quite a foundation to have.
That was a beautiful story, but we all have our own story. So let's take a few minutes to debrief this in community. Circle up with 3 to 5 people and talk through the following questions. The first, what are you hoping Jesus will do in you through this course? Second, as you look back on your life, who or what has had the greatest impact on your spiritual journey thus far? This could be a parent or family member, a childhood experience, an opportunity, or a great loss. What is that for you? And third, what do you think is the driving aim of your life, your top goals and priorities? Please don't feel pressured to pretend or give the right answer. We want this to become a place where we share who we actually are without fear. Finally, how can we as a community pray for you over the next 7 weeks? Take 15 minutes to talk and pray, and then we'll return with our practice for week 1. As we said, each week we'll offer you practices or spiritual exercises to turn the idea of following Jesus into a reality in your daily life. Because information alone is not enough for transformation. To be transformed, we have to get the teachings of Jesus into the muscle memory of our bodies. A few things you should know before we turn to this week's practice. First, alongside this course, we're reading the book Practice in the Way by John Mark. This week, we're reading part 1. Secondly, go ahead and pull out your companion guide for this course. In it are weekly exercises, questions for reflection, short readings, and more. If you don't have a copy yet, it's available through the Practice in the Way site as a free digital download or in a print-on-demand version. But we recommend you order the hard copy to stay away from your phones during prayer. To begin the course, we'll invite you to take the spiritual health reflection. This is a self-assessment we developed for you to plot yourself in the spiritual journey. Once you have a baseline, you can return and retake the assessment in the future in order to better name Jesus' invitation to you along the way. To access the spiritual health reflection, just follow the link in your guide to visit practiceintheway.org. Finally, in each session, Ken Shigematsu, who is a pastor and writer on the spiritual life, will direct us into our practice for the coming week.
Thank you for joining us. It's such a gift to connect with you in this way. The best way to be with Jesus is to develop a daily prayer rhythm. You may already have a daily prayer rhythm, or you may not. But whatever your approach, you will see in our guide that our exercise for week 1 is to develop a daily prayer time and place to connect with God in solitude and silence. This exercise can be done in a few minutes, or you can take up to an hour. The key is to start where you are, not where you feel you should be. If 2 or 3 minutes is all you have, start there and then take the next step. I like to get up early and go for a walk with our golden retriever, and then sit in a quiet spot in our house. Your morning with Jesus might begin by making a cup of tea or coffee. Or you might sit cross-legged on the floor, breathing slowly in and out through your nose. You might begin by praying a psalm, such as the 23rd Psalm, or reading another scripture. Here are a few suggestions as you develop your practice of prayer. First, identify a quiet place that is distraction-free. This could be a corner in your home or a nearby park. Find somewhere where you can focus and be at peace. Second, identify a quiet time. For many people, first thing upon waking is the best possible time to pray. But for you, it may be before bed, or while your baby is napping mid-morning, or on a lunch break. One helpful guideline is to give God your best time of day, and then let the rest of your hours flow out of this time with God. Third, come to quiet. If at all possible, put your phone away in another room. Start with a few deep breaths in and out of your nose. Give your mind and body time and space to calm down. This may take a few minutes. Remember, you're not in a hurry. Fourth, open your heart to God in prayer. Though this may feel unfamiliar and you might not know where to begin, you don't have to start from scratch. For thousands of years, followers of Jesus have used the Psalms, a collection of poetic prayers found in the middle of the Bible, as a guide for daily prayer. The Psalms were designed to be actively prayed or recited, not just read. When we're struggling to pray, the Psalms give us structure to pray and words to express our deepest emotions. You might start with Psalm 1. You could read a short psalm or a portion of a longer psalm each day until you finish the entire book. As I said, this can be done in 5 minutes, or it can easily take up to an hour. Whatever it looks like, the goal this week is to set aside time daily to be with Jesus. The spiritual journey will involve our entire lifetime as we deepen and are transformed by our friendship with Jesus. God bless you as you experience God's presence in silence and solitude.
Let's review what we've covered in session 1. Following Jesus is based on the first century practice of rabbis and apprentices. For us today, to follow Jesus means to apprentice under him. To apprentice under Jesus is to organize your life around 3 driving goals: to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and to do as he did. Apprenticing under Jesus means practicing a way of life. And one of the best ways to begin to be with Jesus is through a daily prayer rhythm, where you create a time and a place for solitude, silence, and prayer.
Jesus did not invite anyone to convert to a new religion called Christianity. He invited them to apprentice under him into what he called the kingdom of God. Simon and Andrew left everything to say yes to this invitation. But there are other stories in the Gospels of people saying no to the same incredible invitation. In America, for all the talk about how the West is post-Christian, 63% of people still self-identify as Christians. But a number of independent surveys put the number of people who are actually following Jesus at around 4%. Many people who identify as Christians are not yet disciples of Jesus. Dallas Willard once said this: "The greatest issue facing the world today, with all its heartbreaking needs, is whether those who are identified as Christians will become disciples, students, apprentices, practitioners of Jesus Christ, steadily learning from him how to live the life of the kingdom of the heavens into every corner of human existence." What about you? Are you ready to follow Jesus, to become his apprentice, to be with him and become like him and eventually do as he did? Do you ache for life with God, to be formed into a person who is pervaded by the love and joy and peace of God? The good news, or the gospel of the kingdom, is this: God has come to you and me in Jesus and made a way for us to apprentice under him into what one early apprentice called the life that is truly life. In Jesus, God has taken on our death to give us his life. He's taken on our brokenness so that we can take on his healing. He's entered our mortality so we can step into his immortality. All we have to do is say yes to Jesus' invitation to become his disciple. And Jesus said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." Whoever, meaning you don't have to be the best of the best of the best to become an apprentice of Jesus. You can be a mess, or deeply wounded, or stuck in a cycle of addiction, or still full of doubt and not even sure what you believe yet. In other words, you can be human. All of us are invited to apprentice under Jesus.